I'm Sarah Mitchell, 28 years old, and 6 months ago I inherited my childhood home after my dad lost his battle with cancer. It should have been straightforward. But my stepfather Walter seems to think the house is his, despite what the will clearly states. The home where I grew up, where every corner holds memories of my dad, has become a battleground. Yesterday, I found a list of house rules taped to my bedroom door, in a house that legally belongs to me. If you've ever had someone try to control something that's rightfully yours, you'll understand why I had to take a stand. Before I tell you how I reclaimed what was mine, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear more stories about standing up for yourself when others try to take what's yours. I was born and raised in Portland, Oregon, in a beautiful two-story Victorian home that my father, Michael Mitchell, poured his heart and soul into maintaining. Every inch of that house tells the story of a man who created a home for his family with his own two hands. My parents were married for 18 years before they divorced when I was 16. It wasn't a bitter split, more of a quiet realization that they had grown in different directions. Dad never said a bad word about my mom, Linda, even after she remarried just 1 year after their divorce papers were finalized. That was just the kind of man he was, gracious to a fault. Walter Davis entered our lives like a salesman who gets his foot in the door and refuses to leave. He was charming at first, attentive to my mother in ways that made her feel special after years of feeling invisible. I was skeptical from the beginning, but I kept my concerns to myself. I was heading to college soon. Not to see Walter, whose charm had quickly faded once the marriage certificate was signed, but to spend time with my dad. We'd always been close. But Dad faced it with the same quiet courage he approached everything in life. "It's just another project to tackle," he told me with a weak smile during one of my increasingly frequent visits home. As his condition deteriorated, I witnessed something that bothered me deeply. Walter began asserting himself more in my father's house, rearranging furniture, making decisions about renovations, all while my father was too weak to protest. Mom seemed oblivious to it, or perhaps she was just focused on caring for my dad in his final months. Either way, Walter's behavior made my skin crawl. In his final weeks, Dad asked to speak with me alone. Walter had taken Mom out shopping, insisting she needed a break from caregiving. Dad motioned for me to come closer to his hospice bed. "Sarah," he whispered, his once strong voice now frail, "I've made arrangements. The house, it's going to you." I tried to protest, thinking of Mom, but he squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "Listen to me. Your mother will always have a place to live as long as you own this house. But I've seen how Walter handles money, how he controls everything. This house needs to be yours. Promise me you'll protect it." I promised, not fully understanding the weight of what he was asking. 6 months ago, I stood by his grave, still in shock that he was truly gone. The following week, we gathered at his lawyer's office for the reading of the will. That's when everything changed. The house, the entire property, had been left solely to me. Not to my mother. Not to Walter. To me. The look on Walter's face when the lawyer read that part of the will is something I'll never forget. A flash of anger quickly masked by a sympathetic smile directed at my mother, whose expression was more surprised than upset. "Well, I'm sure Sarah understands this is just a legal formality," Walter said smoothly after the reading. "Nothing will change, of course." But as I soon discovered, things had already changed long before Dad passed away. Mom and Walter had been living in the house rent-free for years, ever since my father moved into a small apartment closer to his woodworking studio. Dad had never asked them for money, viewing it as a way to help Mom financially. He never mentioned that Walter, who worked as a regional sales manager for a pharmaceutical company, had plenty of money of his own but had convinced my mother that investing in his various opportunities was more important than maintaining their own home. After the funeral, I took a leave of absence from my design firm in Seattle. I was fortunate enough to have built a solid reputation as a graphic designer, with clients who were willing to work with me remotely. This flexibility allowed me to make the decision to temporarily move back to Portland, into my childhood home, my home now, to sort through Dad's belongings and figure out my next steps. I approached the situation with compassion and practicality. I understood that my mother had been living in the house for years, and suddenly asking her to leave would be cruel. So I proposed what I thought was a reasonable solution. Mom and Walter could stay for 6 months, giving them ample time to find a new place while I sorted through Dad's possessions and decided whether to sell the house or keep it. What I didn't anticipate was that Walter had no intention of acknowledging my ownership, temporary or otherwise. He had already claimed the house as his domain, and he wasn't about to let a piece of paper, even a legal will, change that. The atmosphere in the lawyer's office that day was thick with tension. Mr. Goldstein, my father's attorney for over 20 years, had maintained his professional composure as he read the will, but even he seemed uncomfortable when he reached the part about the house. To my beloved daughter, Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, I leave my home at 1847 Oakwood Drive, Portland, Oregon, along with all its contents and the surrounding property. It is my wish that this home, which has sheltered our family through joy and sorrow, continue to be a place of comfort and safety in her capable hands. Mom's eyes had widened, her hand automatically reaching for Walter's arm. Walter's reaction was more controlled, but I caught the momentary tightening of his jaw before he plastered on a sympathetic smile. After the reading, Mr. Goldstein provided me with a folder containing all the legal documentation showing the transfer of ownership. The deed, the property tax information, insurance papers, everything meticulously organized, just like Dad. He had prepared for this transition with characteristic thoroughness. Your father was very clear about his wishes, Mr. Goldstein told me privately as we were leaving. If you have any problems or questions, don't hesitate to call me. At the time, I thought he was just being polite. Later, I would wonder if he had anticipated the conflict that was brewing. In the car ride back to the house, Walter broke the uncomfortable silence. You know, Sarah, this change in ownership is just a technicality. Your mother and I have been maintaining that house for years. Your father's decision was probably just his way of making sure the property stayed in the family name. I didn't respond immediately, still processing everything. Mom sat silently in the passenger seat, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. Of course, nothing needs to change, Walter continued, his tone casual, but with an undercurrent I couldn't quite identify. We'll continue taking care of the place just as we have been. You can go back to your life in Seattle knowing everything is handled. That night, alone in my hotel room, I reread the letter Dad had given me a month before he died. He had instructed me not to open it until after the will was read. My dearest Sarah, it began. If you're reading this, then you know about the house. I need to explain my decision. It's not that I don't trust your mother's judgment, but I've watched how Walter has gradually taken control of her finances over the years. The house is the only asset I can protect from his influence. It's not just about the property. It's about giving you security and, hopefully, giving your mother a safety net should she ever need one. Walter has been making risky investments with her retirement savings. I fear that without this safeguard, she could end up with nothing. The letter went on to detail conversations Dad had overheard, financial documents he'd glimpsed, patterns of behavior that had alarmed him. It was clear that his decision hadn't been made lightly or out of any desire to create conflict. He genuinely feared for Mom's financial security under Walter's influence. The next morning, I drove to the house, my house, with a new perspective and a growing sense of responsibility. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Walter's expensive SUV parked in what had always been my father's spot in the garage. A small thing, perhaps, but symbolic of the larger situation. I'd been staying in a hotel since arriving for the funeral, not wanting to impose during such a difficult time. Now, I was returning not as a guest, but as the legal owner. And the weight of that reality settled heavily on my shoulders. Inside, I found Mom in the kitchen, preparing lunch. Her eyes were red-rimmed. Whether from grief or the conversation she'd likely had with Walter the night before, I couldn't tell. I've been thinking about what Dad would want, I said gently after giving her a hug. And I know he wouldn't want us to be at odds over this. Walter is very upset, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. He says Michael was being spiteful, trying to punish me for remarrying. That stung. Dad had never been spiteful a day in his life. You know that's not true, Mom. Dad loved you. He just wanted to make sure you were taken care of. We are taken care of, she insisted, a defensive edge creeping into her tone. Walter provides very well for us. I took a deep breath. I'm not here to disrupt your life. I know this has been your home for years, but I need some time to go through Dad's things to decide what to do next. I was thinking I could move into my old room temporarily, just for a few months while I sort everything out. She seemed relieved at this suggestion, as if she'd been expecting something more drastic. That would be fine, sweetheart. Your room is still your room. What she didn't say, but what I soon discovered, was that my room had been transformed into a storage space for Walter's golf equipment. Boxes of his business documents and exercise equipment that looked like it had never been used. Later that afternoon, I outlined my proposal to both of them. I would move in temporarily. They could continue living there for up to 6 months, and during that time, we could all adjust to the new reality and make plans for the future. Mom nodded agreeably. Walter sat stone-faced, his arms crossed over his chest. And what happens after 6 months, he finally asked, his tone making it clear he was humoring me rather than acknowledging my authority. After 6 months. We reassess, I said firmly. But ultimately, as the owner, I'll need to decide whether to sell the house or live in it myself. Owner, Walter repeated, the word dripping with condescension. A piece of paper doesn't erase years of investment. Do you have any idea how much we've put into this place? The property taxes alone. Which Dad paid, I interrupted, my patience wearing thin. I've seen the records, Walter. Dad continued paying the property taxes, insurance, and most of the maintenance costs even after he moved out. His face flushed, but he quickly recovered. Your father wasn't thinking clearly in his final months. Surely you don't intend to displace your own mother because of a decision made under duress? And there it was, the manipulation tactic I would come to recognize all too well in the weeks ahead. Using my love for my mother as leverage, painting my father as mentally compromised, positioning himself as the reasonable party while I was the heartless daughter. The conversation ended in a stalemate. I would move in the following weekend. Walter made it clear he was allowing this arrangement temporarily, while I knew legally I didn't need his permission at all. As I drove back to my hotel, my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Please be patient with Walter. This has been hard on him too. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, wondering how my very reasonable proposal had somehow made me the villain in her eyes. But I remembered my promise to Dad, and I knew this was just the beginning of what would likely be a difficult battle. The following Saturday morning, I arrived at the house with my car packed with suitcases and boxes. The Seattle apartment I'd been renting was now sublet to a colleague, and I'd put most of my furniture in storage. This move. He made no move to help as I began unloading my car, despite the obvious weight of some of the boxes. Mom eventually came out, giving me a quick hug before grabbing one of the smaller bags. It's good to have you home, sweetheart, she said, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Thanks, Mom. It feels strange to be back, but good too. Walter remained in the doorway, arms crossed. I'm moving back in, temporarily. His eyes narrowed slightly, but he stepped aside to let me pass. My childhood bedroom looked nothing like I remembered. The blue walls I had painted with Dad's help when I was 14 were now a sterile beige. My bulletin board, where I'd pinned design inspirations and photos of friends, was gone. The room felt hollow, stripped of personality. We needed the storage space, Mom explained apologetically as she helped me move some of Walter's boxes to the garage. Walter has so many important documents for work. I bit back the question of why these important documents were stuffed haphazardly into unlabeled boxes rather than properly filed. Instead, I focused on making the space livable again, hanging a few art prints I'd brought and arranging my laptop on the desk that had somehow survived the purge. That evening, Mom prepared dinner, Walter's favorite pot roast, I noted, not the vegetarian fare she knew I preferred. We sat at the dining table in awkward silence until Walter cleared his throat. So, Sarah, I'm planning to stay for a few months to sort through Dad's belongings and decide what to do with the house. Your mother has already gone through Michael's things, Walter said dismissively. There's really no need for such a prolonged presence. Mom stared down at her plate, saying nothing. Actually, I countered, Dad had a lot of personal items that hold sentimental value for me. But perhaps a weekend here, and there would be more appropriate than moving in. I put my fork down, my appetite vanishing. Walter, I think there's a misunderstanding. This isn't Mom's house, legally, it's mine. Dad left it to me in his will, as you know. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The pain, his judgment was compromised. I'm sure once you've had time to reflect, you'll realize that honoring his true wishes means respecting the home your mother and I have established here. Mom reached over to pat his hand, a placating gesture that made my stomach turn. Let's not discuss this at dinner, she murmured. After the uncomfortable meal. But when I tried the door, I found it locked. Why is Dad's study locked? I asked Mom, who was loading the dishwasher while Walter watched television in the living room. She glanced nervously toward the living room. Walter uses it as his home office now. He has confidential work documents in there. I'd like to see it, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. There are things of Dad's I want to look through. You'll need to ask Walter for the key, she replied, her focus returning to the dishes with unusual intensity. I found Walter reclining in what had been my father's favorite leather armchair, watching a golf tournament. I'd like to see Dad's study, I said without preamble. He didn't look away from the screen. There's nothing in there that concerns you. My father's belongings concern me very much, I replied, struggling to keep my voice level. And since the house and its contents were left to me, I have a right to access every room. This got his attention. He muted the TV and turned to face me, his expression calculating. Your father's personal effects were removed months ago. That room is now my private office, containing confidential information related to my work. I'm afraid I can't allow access to just anyone. I'm not just anyone, Walter. I'm the legal owner of this house, and I'm asking you to unlock my father's study. We stared at each other in silent battle until Mom appeared in the doorway, wringing a dish towel in her hands. Please, can we not do this tonight? It's Sarah's first evening back home. Walter's expression softened immediately as he turned to my mother. Of course, dear. I retrieved the spare key I knew Dad kept hidden in a small compartment of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Some things, thankfully, hadn't changed. The study was unrecognizable. Dad's warm, cluttered space had been transformed into a sterile corporate office. His bookshelves, once filled with novels and woodworking manuals, now displayed Walter's sales awards and pharmaceutical conference mementos. The walls, previously adorned with family photos and paintings I had given Dad over the years, were now bare except for Walter's framed certifications. I stood in the center of the room, feeling as though I'd been punched in the gut. No sign of Dad's sketch pads or design tools. The filing cabinet contained only Walter's work documents and financial records. I was about to leave when I noticed something partially visible behind the desk. Pulling it forward, I discovered a cardboard box shoved against the wall. The sight of my father's precious belongings treated with such disregard broke something inside me. I sank to the floor, clutching one of his journals to my chest, tears flowing freely. That was how Walter found me an hour later when he came downstairs for a glass of water and noticed the light under the study door. He stood in the doorway, his face darkening with anger. What do you think you're doing? This is my private office. I rose to my feet, still holding the journal. No, Walter. This was my father's study in my father's house. And you've treated his memories like trash. I allowed your mother to save those sentimental items, he said defensively. I could have thrown them out months ago. You have no right to throw out anything in this house, I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. Not one single thing. This house and everything in it belongs to me now. And it's time you understood that. His face contorted with barely controlled rage. You think a piece of paper gives you the right to waltz in here and disrupt our lives? The blatant lie stunned me momentarily. I had visited Dad religiously throughout his illness, often staying for weeks at a time to help with his care. Walter had rarely been present during those visits, conveniently away on business trips. "We both know that's not true," I said quietly. "But it doesn't matter. The fact remains that Dad left this house to me, and while I'm trying to be considerate of Mom's situation, I won't be bullied or manipulated by you." Walter stepped closer. His imposing height meant to intimidate. "You're making a mistake, turning this into a battle. Your mother is very upset by your behavior." "My mother is upset because you're making her choose sides," I countered. "And I'm not looking for a battle, Walter. I'm looking for respect, for me, for my ownership of this house, and for my father's memory." He stared at me for a long moment before his face shifted into a cold smile. "Well, if you insist on staying here in our home, there are going to be some rules. After all, every household needs structure." With that ominous statement, he turned and left me standing alone in the study, surrounded by the discarded remnants of my father's life. By the end of my first week back in the house, it became abundantly clear that Walter had no intention of respecting my ownership or my boundaries. On Monday morning, I came downstairs to find a typed "House Rules and Responsibilities" chart taped to the refrigerator. My name appeared in several slots for cleaning duties, with specific instructions on how each task should be performed to Walter's standards. I could have ripped it down. Legally, I had every right to. But I was trying to maintain peace for my mother's sake, so I let it slide, even participating in some of the chores while focusing on organizing my father's belongings. The chore chart was just the beginning. By Wednesday, Walter had implemented quiet hours from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m., during which no showers were to be taken, no food prepared, and no television watched. This directly interfered with my work schedule, as I often had late-night video calls with clients in different time zones. When I explained this to Walter, his response was dismissive. "This is a respectable household, not a college dormitory. If your work requires such unusual hours, perhaps you should reconsider your living situation." The bathroom became another battleground. A laminated bathroom schedule appeared on the door, allotting each of us specific times. Mine, conveniently, was from 6 to 6:30 a.m., despite Walter knowing I typically started work at 9 o'clock. I adapted as best I could, setting my alarm earlier, working around their schedules, trying to minimize conflict. But Walter seemed determined to assert his authority in increasingly intrusive ways. One afternoon, I returned from a coffee shop where I'd been working to find my bedroom door ajar. Inside, I discovered my belongings had been rearranged. My clothes, previously hung by color in the closet, were now organized by garment type. My design books, which I had arranged by subject, were now alphabetized. Even my toiletries in the bathroom had been reorganized. "Mom, did you rearrange my things?" I asked cautiously during dinner that evening. She looked confused. "No." "Walter, I appreciate the thought, but I'd prefer if you didn't enter my room or touch my things without asking," I said, striving for politeness. He fixed me with a cold stare. "As long as you're living under our roof, all spaces are subject to inspection and maintenance. We have standards in this household." "It's not your roof, Walter," I reminded him quietly. "And my room is private." Mom quickly changed the subject, her anxiety palpable. This became a pattern. Walter would overstep, I would object, and Mom would rush to diffuse the tension, usually by redirecting the conversation or suggesting we all just try to get along. The monitoring of my comings and goings began subtly. Walter would casually inquire about my plans each morning. But when he began commenting on my choices, that coffee shop again. "Don't you think that's becoming an expensive habit, or another dinner with friends?" The situation escalated dramatically when Walter invited his adult children over for Sunday dinner without consulting me. Jake, his 32-year-old son, and Melissa, his 29-year-old daughter. It must be so hard, coming back after all this time and trying to connect with a house that's changed so much. "Actually, I'm not coming back. This has always been my home," I corrected her. "My father left it to me." She gave me a patronizing smile. "Yes, but Dad and Linda have been the ones actually living here, making it a home. You've been gone for years." Throughout dinner, Jake and Melissa reminisced about holidays and gatherings they'd spent in Dad and Linda's house, speaking as if the property had always belonged to Walter, occasionally shooting me challenging glances, daring me to correct them. For my mother's sake, I held my tongue, but inside I was seething. After they left, he said the old photos didn't match our new decor vision. And where are they now? I pressed. In boxes in the attic, I think, she replied vaguely. Walter handled it. I immediately went to check the attic, only to find it locked with a padlock that hadn't been there before. When confronted, Walter claimed it was for safety reasons and that he'd get around to finding the key when he had time. That night, I installed a lock on my bedroom door. It wasn't an elegant solution. He pounded on my door at 6 a.m., waking me from a sound sleep. What is the meaning of this? He demanded when I opened the door, bleary-eyed. There are no locked doors in my house. Remove it immediately. No, Walter, I said firmly, fully awake now. This is my private space, and it will remain locked when I'm not here. This is completely unacceptable, he fumed. What are you hiding in there? What don't you want us to see? I'm not hiding anything. I simply want my privacy respected. Before I could respond, Mom appeared behind him, her face etched with worry. Please, both of you, stop this. We're family. We shouldn't be fighting like this. The manipulation was so transparent it made my stomach turn. The lock is staying, Walter. And if you remove my door, I'll be consulting with Dad's lawyer about harassment and violation of my property rights. I closed the door firmly, my heart pounding. Through the wood, I heard my mother's soft pleading and Walter's clipped responses. Once again, he had positioned me as the unreasonable one, the troublemaker disrupting their peaceful home. Later that day, I discovered Walter had been opening my mail. A letter from one of my clients had clearly been opened and resealed clumsily. When confronted, Walter didn't even deny it. You're a guest in my house. The word guest hit him like a physical blow. His face contorted with rage before he mastered himself, smoothing his features into a cold mask. We'll see about that, he said quietly before walking away. That evening, I found a notice on my bedroom door informing me that the water heater was being serviced the next day, and hot water would be unavailable from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., precisely when Walter knew I had an important video presentation scheduled. The pattern was becoming clear. Every boundary I set was met with a new form of retaliation. Walter was engaged in a war of attrition, using every passive-aggressive tactic he could devise to make me uncomfortable enough to leave. But he had underestimated both my determination and my promise to my father. I wasn't going anywhere. 2 months into my stay, the tension in the house had become almost unbearable. Walter had escalated his tactics, finding new ways to assert control and undermine my ownership daily. Mom had retreated further into herself, becoming a shadow that flitted anxiously between us, always trying to smooth things over but never actually addressing the real issues. On a Thursday evening, I returned from a client meeting to find the house transformed. What's going on? I asked, setting down my portfolio. Mom looked up from the pot she was stirring, her expression harried. Oh, Sarah, I thought you'd be home earlier. Walter's hosting a dinner party for some colleagues tonight. Didn't he mention it to you? He hadn't, of course. This was yet another calculated move in his ongoing campaign, organizing a major event in my home without even informing me, let alone asking permission. No, he didn't say anything, I replied. I still need to finish the appetizers and get changed. Do you need help? I offered, more for her sake than Walter's. Relief flooded her face. Could you? That would be wonderful. In my own home. I considered changing into nicer clothes but decided against it. This wasn't my event, and I refused to pretend otherwise. Walter returned home with barely enough time to shower and change before the guests arrived. He swept through the kitchen, inspecting our preparations with a critical eye. I replied evenly. I wasn't aware of this dinner until I got home, so I didn't plan my day around it. His eyes narrowed. These people are guests in our home. A certain standard of hospitality is expected. They're your guests, Walter. Not mine. Before he could respond, The doorbell rang, signaling the arrival of the first guests. Walter gave me a look that clearly communicated this discussion wasn't over, then transformed instantly into the charming host as he went to answer the door. What followed was one of the most surreal evenings of my life. I sat at my own dining table in my own home, listening as Walter entertained his guests with stories about when we bought this place and our renovation plans for the summer. He referred to the house as our home repeatedly. They complimented him on the lovely home he and Linda had created, asked about the history of the house, and listened attentively as he gave them a tour, pointing out features my father had installed as if they had been his own ideas. We're thinking of converting the upstairs study into a proper home theater. I overheard him telling a couple as they admired the built-in bookshelves my dad had crafted by hand. The woodwork is a bit outdated, but nothing a good contractor can't fix. Those bookshelves had been a labor of love, designed specifically to hold my mother's collection of classic novels. Dad had spent weeks getting the proportions just right. The wood stained to match her antique reading chair. Hearing Walter dismiss them as outdated made my blood boil. During dinner, Walter held court at the head of the table, my father's position for as long as I could remember. He poured wine generously, encouraged seconds of my mother's cooking, and generally played the role of magnanimous host to perfection. I remained largely silent, responding politely when directly addressed, but otherwise observing the performance with growing discomfort. No one questioned my presence or role, assuming, I suppose, that I was simply Walter and Linda's daughter home for a visit. The breaking point came during Walter's toast. Standing at the head of the table, wine glass raised, he surveyed the gathered guests with satisfaction. "Linda and I want to thank you all for coming tonight," he began, placing his free hand on my mother's shoulder. "Your friendship and support have meant the world to us, especially over this past year as we've dealt with family challenges." Mom lowered her eyes, clearly uncomfortable with the reference to my father's death as a family challenge. "This home has been our haven," Walter continued, "and we're grateful to be able to share it with people who matter to us. To good friends and new beginnings." As everyone raised their glasses, something inside me snapped. The weeks of passive-aggressive control tactics, the dismissal of my father's memory, the manipulation of my mother, and now this public erasure of my ownership, it was too much. "Actually," I said clearly as the toast concluded, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. This house belonged to my father, Michael Mitchell, and he left it to me when he passed away 6 months ago. Walter and my mother are staying here temporarily while they make other arrangements." A heavy silence fell over the table. Walter's smile froze in place, his knuckles whitening around his wine glass. Mom looked mortified, her face flushing deep red. One of the guests, a woman in her 50s, broke the silence with an awkward laugh. "Well, family arrangements can be so complicated these days. Another toast, perhaps? To family?" The conversation gradually resumed, but the atmosphere had shifted palpably. "You're embarrassing your mother in front of my colleagues." "No, Walter, you're embarrassing yourself by lying about owning this house," I replied, keeping my voice low but firm. "These people think you own a home that isn't yours." "This is not the time or place for your petty power play," he snapped. "These people are important to my career. We will discuss this later," he promised before plastering on his host's smile and returning to the dining room. After the guests departed, Walter wasted no time confronting me. Mom busied herself in the kitchen, loading the dishwasher with shaking hands while Walter cornered me in the living room. "Your behavior tonight was completely unacceptable," he began, his voice cold with fury. "You've potentially damaged my professional relationships and humiliated your mother." "My behavior?" I echoed in disbelief. "You organized a dinner party in my house without my knowledge, repeatedly referred to it as your home, and outlined renovation plans for property you don't own. And I'm the one behaving unacceptably?" "This has gone far enough," Walter declared. "Your father's misguided decision doesn't override years of established residence. Linda and I have made this our home. And your temporary legal advantage doesn't change that reality." "Temporary legal advantage?" I repeated, stunned by his framing. "Walter, This isn't a game or a negotiation tactic. Dad left this house to me, period. It's not temporary, and it's not up for debate. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a menacing tone. I've already contacted contractors about the renovations. Work begins next month on the upstairs bathroom and your father's old study. I've been generous in allowing you to stay this long, but clearly that was a mistake. The realization that he had been making plans to renovate my house without my knowledge or consent was the final straw. You have no right to make any changes to this house, Walter. None. Any contractors you've contacted need to be canceled immediately. Or what? He challenged, his confidence suggesting he believed he held some trump card. Or I'll pursue legal action for property damage and unauthorized modifications, I stated firmly. And I'll begin formal eviction proceedings. The word eviction hung in the air between us. From the kitchen doorway, I heard my mother's sharp intake of breath. You would evict your own mother? Walter asked, his tone dripping with manufactured shock and disapproval. I would never evict Mom, I clarified, turning to include her in the conversation. She's welcome to stay as long as she wants. You, however, are a different story. He's just trying to maintain the home we've built together. Linda, Walter interjected, his tone softening dramatically as he addressed my mother. Sarah doesn't understand what we've invested in this place. She thinks her father's signature on a piece of paper outweighs years of marriage and shared life. I was here, dealing with your father's increasing instability, supporting your mother through his illness. This house represents years of my life. And I'm not about to let you waltz in and claim ownership based on a decision your father made when he wasn't in his right mind. That was when I noticed something on the coffee table that hadn't been there before, a folder containing legal documents. Glancing at it, I recognized my father's financial statements and what appeared to be copies of his medical records. What are those? I demanded, pointing to the folder. And why do you have Dad's medical records? Walter moved to cover the documents, but not before I saw what they were, paperwork exploring potential grounds to contest my father's will. You've been looking for ways to challenge Dad's will? I asked, the pieces finally clicking into place. That's what this has all been about, wearing me down while you build a case to take the house? Your father was heavily medicated when he made those changes to his will, Walter stated, not even bothering to deny it now. Any competent lawyer will see that his judgment was impaired. Walter's expression hardened. We'll see what the courts have to say about that. Walter, please, Mom pleaded. Can't we just talk about this as a family? We're beyond talking, Mom. I said sadly. Walter has been systematically trying to push me out while building a legal case to take the house. He's been going through Dad's private papers, opening my mail, and planning renovations without my consent. This isn't a misunderstanding. It's a calculated plan. Sarah, that's not fair, she protested. Walter is just trying to protect our home. It's not his home to protect, I stated firmly. And I'm starting to think it never was about protecting a home for you either, Mom. This is about control and entitlement. Walter's mask finally slipped completely. Of course I feel entitled, he exploded. I've been putting up with your father's daughter for years, playing nice. Watching him favor you even from his deathbed. That house should have gone to your mother, my wife, not to his precious little girl who couldn't even be bothered to move back until there was property to inherit. The raw bitterness in his voice stunned us both into silence. Mom looked at her husband as if seeing him clearly for the first time, her expression a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. Walter, she whispered, is that really how you feel? That Sarah doesn't deserve her father's home. What I feel, he said, regaining some composure, is that a dying man made an irrational decision that disregarded years of marriage and family bonds. A decision that needs to be corrected. In that moment, looking at Walter's cold determination and my mother's confused hurt, I realized that this conflict had never really been about providing security for my mother, as he had claimed. It had been about Walter's sense of entitlement, his belief that my father's house should have become his property through marriage to my mother. I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. The constant second-guessing, the worry that I was being unreasonable or selfish, had vanished. In its place was a steely determination to protect what was rightfully mine and, by extension, my father's legacy. My first call was to Mr. Goldstein, Dad's lawyer. His secretary initially told me he was booked solid for the next 2 weeks, but when I explained the situation, she put me through immediately. Sarah, he greeted me warmly. I've been wondering when I'd hear from you. How are things with the house? I gave him a concise summary of the events since I'd moved in, culminating with the discovery of Walter's plans to contest the will. I'm not entirely surprised, Mr. Goldstein admitted with a sigh. Your father anticipated something like this might happen. It's why he was so meticulous about the documentation. So Walter doesn't have a case? I asked, relief washing over me. Not a strong one, the lawyer confirmed. Your father had multiple medical assessments confirming his mental competence at the time he changed his will. He also recorded his reasoning, both in writing and in a video statement. He was very thorough. Dad made a video? This was news to me. Yes, at my suggestion. He explained exactly why he was leaving the house to you and not to Linda. He was concerned that Walter might try to contest the will on grounds of diminished capacity or undue influence. Can Walter still take this to court? I asked. He can try, Mr. Goldstein replied. Anyone can file a lawsuit. But he'd be wasting his money. Your position is legally unassailable. The confirmation that my legal standing was secure gave me the confidence to begin formulating a plan. While Walter might not be able to take the house through legal channels, he was still making my life difficult and manipulating my mother. That needed to stop. Over the next few days, I began documenting everything, taking photographs of the state of the house. Walter had been intercepting property tax notices and other official mail related to the house. I confirmed this by calling the county assessor's office, and I set up electronic notifications for everything I could. I also changed all the passwords on my accounts after discovering Walter had attempted to access my email. The most difficult part of my plan involved my mother. I needed to understand why she continued to support Walter despite his increasingly obvious manipulation. Was she truly oblivious? Suggesting a small cafe several miles from the house, far enough that we wouldn't run into anyone Walter knew. The choice of location told me she understood the need for privacy, which was telling in itself. When we met, the strain of the past months showed clearly on her face. She looked older, more fragile than I had ever seen her. We ordered our coffees and found a quiet corner table. Mom, I began gently, I need to understand what's happening. Walter has been good to me in many ways. When your father and I divorced, I was scared of being alone. Walter made me feel secure again. But at what cost, Mom? The tears spilled over. I don't know anymore, she whispered. I'm just tired. So tired of walking on eggshells, of trying to keep the peace between you two, of defending choices I'm not even sure were mine to begin with. She went on to reveal things she had kept hidden for years. How Walter had gradually taken control of her finances, convincing her to put her divorce settlement into investments he managed. How he had isolated her from friends who asked too many questions. How he monitored her phone calls and criticized her choices until it was easier to just let him decide everything. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, reaching across the table to take her hand. I was embarrassed, she admitted, and afraid you would think less of me for being so weak. Your father was always so proud of your independence. I didn't want you to see how much I'd lost mine. Mom, I would never think less of you. But I am worried about you. What Walter is doing, it's not just controlling, it's financial and emotional abuse. She flinched at the word abuse, but didn't contradict me. I wouldn't go that far. Mom, he's isolated you, controls your money, monitors your movements, criticizes you constantly, and makes you feel like you can't survive without him. That's the textbook definition of emotional abuse. She was quiet for a long time, absorbing this. Finally, watching you refuse to be bullied, it's made me see things differently. Then let me help you, Mom. You don't have to stay with him. Fear flickered across her face. I can't just leave. Where would I go? All our money is tied up in Walter's investments. I don't even know if I have access to it anymore. We'll figure it out together, I promised. But first, I need to know. If it comes down to a choice between Walter and me, which side are you on? She squeezed my hand. You're my daughter, Sarah. I should never have let it get to the point where you had to ask that question. After our heart-to-heart, I reached out to my mom's sister, Aunt Julie, who lived in Eugene. Linda can stay with me as long as she needs, Aunt Julie offered immediately. I've got plenty of space, and frankly, I've been worried about her for years. With that safety net in place. Your mother has been in a controlling relationship for years, Dr. Martinez explained during our first session. Her sense of self and her decision-making confidence have been systematically undermined. Recovery takes time and support. Over the next few weeks, I continued gathering evidence and building my case. I met again with Mr. Goldstein to review all the documentation and ensure everything was in order. He helped me prepare a formal eviction notice that would give Walter 30 days to vacate the premises, a courtesy period longer than legally required. What about Mom? I asked. Legally. I also consulted with a financial advisor who specialized in helping women regain financial independence after controlling relationships. She provided guidance on how Mom could begin disentangling her finances from Walter's control. The first step is information gathering, she advised. Bank accounts, investment portfolios, credit cards, retirement funds. We need to know what exists and who has access. Armed with legal documentation, financial guidance, and emotional support from both professionals and family, I felt prepared for the confrontation that was inevitable. I scheduled a formal family meeting at the house, asking Mr. Goldstein to be present. I spent the evening before the meeting in Dad's study, my study now, sorting through the last of his papers. In a weathered copy of his favorite woodworking book, I found several pages of his handwriting, a letter he had never sent. Reading his words, his concern for Mom and his faith in me strengthened my resolve. Sarah, he had written, if you're reading this, then the worst has happened, and I'm no longer there to protect your mother from Walter's influence. I've seen how he isolates her, controls her, makes her doubt herself. The house is your anchor, your security, but it's also a potential lifeline for your mother when she's ready to see the truth. Be patient with her, but be strong for both of you. You have always been my greatest pride. The next morning, I prepared the dining room for our meeting. Walter had been increasingly absent from the house, working late and leaving early. Clearly aware that something had shifted. Mom had been quiet but calmer, spending more time on the phone with Aunt Julie and meeting with Dr. Martinez on her own. When Walter arrived home and saw Mr. Goldstein sitting at the dining table, his face darkened. What is this ambush? This is a family meeting, Walter, I said calmly. Please sit down. We have important matters to discuss. I don't have time for this, he blustered, but Mom's quiet voice cut through his protests. Sit down, Walter. We need to talk. Surprised by her firmness, he reluctantly took a seat, his body language defensive and hostile. I'll get straight to the point, I began. This situation isn't working for any of us. After careful consideration and legal consultation, I've decided it's time for formal arrangements. I slid the envelope containing the eviction notice across the table. This is a formal notice requiring you to vacate the premises within 30 days. Walter didn't touch the envelope. This is ridiculous. Linda, are you going to let her throw us out of our home? It's not our home, Walter, Mom said quietly. It never was. Walter, Mom interjected. Sarah has helped me see clearly for the first time in years. The way you've been treating her, trying to take her home. Your health, your anxiety, you need me. Actually, I cut in, Mom is stronger than you've let her believe. And she won't be alone. She has me, Aunt Julie, and a support network you've been keeping her from for years. Mr. Goldstein cleared his throat. Mr. Davis, I should inform you that attempts to contest the will have been anticipated and thoroughly prepared for. Michael Mitchell was extremely thorough in documenting his mental competence and his reasons for leaving the property to his daughter. Any legal challenge would be costly and ultimately unsuccessful. Walter's face flushed dark red. This isn't over, he threatened. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Actually, I do, I replied evenly. I'm dealing with a man who thought he could bully and manipulate his way into owning my father's house. A man who's been financially and emotionally abusing my mother for years. A man who's about to discover that his control is an illusion. Walter stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Mom flinched but remained seated, her posture straighter than I'd seen in months. "Are you okay?" I asked her softly. She nodded slowly. "I think I will be. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually." She turned to Mr. Goldstein. "What happens now?" "Now," he said kindly, "we make sure you're protected. Both of you." The 30 days following our confrontation with Walter were tense, but transformative. True to his nature, Walter didn't go quietly. He made one last desperate attempt to assert control, hiring a lawyer to send threatening letters challenging the will. As Mr. Goldstein had predicted, the case fell apart as soon as Dad's extensive documentation was presented. Walter moved out 3 days before the eviction deadline, but not before making his mark one last time. I came home from helping Mom move some of her things to Aunt Julie's to find several walls damaged with holes punched through the drywall, my father's handcrafted dining table deeply scratched, and the plumbing in the upstairs bathroom mysteriously leaking. Property damage during an eviction is unfortunately common. The police officer told me as she documented the destruction for my insurance claim. It's a final act of control when they realize they've lost. Mom was devastated when she saw what Walter had done to the house. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I should have seen who he really was years ago." "It's not your fault, Mom," I assured her, hugging her tightly. "And walls can be repaired. The important thing is that we're both free of his influence now." With Walter gone, the house felt different, lighter somehow, despite the damage. Mom stayed for 2 weeks, helping me clean and repair, before moving to Aunt Julie's apartment in Eugene. It was a difficult goodbye, but we both knew it was necessary for her healing process. The first room I tackled was the master bedroom, which Walter had claimed as his domain. I stripped it completely, new paint, new flooring, new fixtures. Every trace of Walter was methodically removed and replaced with elements that reflected my own style and my father's craftsmanship. Dad's study was next. I restored his bookshelves, polishing the wood until it gleamed, and returned his books to their rightful places. His desk, which Walter had relegated to the garage, was brought back and positioned by the window, where Dad had always preferred to work. As I sorted through the box of my father's personal effects that Walter had so carelessly stashed away, I found a sealed envelope with my name on it, hidden between the pages of one of his journals. Inside was a letter, dated just weeks before his death. "My dearest Sarah," it began. "If you're reading this, then the house is yours, as I intended. I want you to know why this was so important to me. This house isn't just walls and a roof. It's the physical embodiment of the love and care I tried to provide for our family. When your mother and I divorced, my greatest regret was that I couldn't protect her from making what I feared was a mistake with Walter. But I could protect this home, this small piece of our family history, by ensuring it passed to you. My hope is that this house will be a fresh start for you, a place to build your own dreams just as I built mine. Whether you choose to live in it, sell it, or share it, know that it comes with no strings attached except the hope that it brings you joy and security. I've watched you grow into a strong, independent woman who knows her own mind and stands firm in her convictions. That has been my greatest achievement and my deepest pride. Whatever challenges come your way, remember that you have the strength to face them, just as you've faced so many before. All my love, always, Dad." Tears streamed down my face as I read and reread his words. In that moment, I felt his presence so strongly it was as if he were standing beside me, his hand on my shoulder, his quiet strength supporting me as it always had. Over the next few months, Mom began to flourish in her new independence. With the help of the financial advisor, she discovered Walter had indeed been mismanaging her money, but not as catastrophically as she had feared. She had enough from her divorce settlement and retirement account to live comfortably, especially sharing expenses with Aunt Julie. "He always made me feel like I was one bad decision away from poverty," she confided during one of our weekly phone calls. "But that was just another way to keep me dependent on him." Her therapy was going well, too. Dr. Martinez had connected her with a support group for women recovering from controlling relationships, and the solidarity she found there was helping her recognize and dismantle the manipulation tactics Walter had used. As for the house, I decided to make it my permanent home. My design business was thriving, and I had always loved Portland. The remote work arrangements I'd made during my temporary stay had proven so successful that my firm offered me a permanent position as their Pacific Northwest representative, allowing me to work from home while traveling occasionally to client meetings. 6 months after Walter's departure, I hosted a housewarming gathering. Mom came up from Eugene with Aunt Julie. Friends from Seattle drove down. Neighbors who had known our family for years brought dishes and housewarming gifts. Mr. Goldstein and his wife attended, bringing a beautiful handmade quilt as a gift. The house was filled with laughter and warmth, so different from the tense, controlled atmosphere of Walter's dinner party. As I looked around at the people who truly cared about me and my mother, I felt a deep sense of peace and rightness. Later that evening, after everyone had gone, I sat alone on the porch swing my father had built when I was 9. The night was clear, stars visible despite the city lights. I thought about everything that had happened, the loss, the struggle, the victory, the healing. Dad had known, somehow, that I would need this house not just as a physical shelter, but as a tangible reminder of my own strength in fighting for my inheritance, evolving from mother and daughter to true friends and allies. The house around me was now truly mine, every wall painted, every room arranged according to my preferences, every space filled with objects that held meaning and brought joy. But the real inheritance wasn't the physical structure. It was the inner strength my father had always seen in me, the resilience he had nurtured, the independence he had encouraged. Sometimes, I realized, losing someone you love teaches you how to stand up for yourself in ways they always hoped you would. For Walter's challenge, which had forced me to find my voice and stand my ground. The house was mine, not just legally, but in every way that mattered. And in reclaiming my inheritance, I had also reclaimed something even more valuable, the certainty that I was my father's daughter through and through, with all the strength and determination that entailed. Have you ever had to stand up for something that was rightfully yours? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments below. And if this tale of standing firm against manipulation resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in difficult situations. Your support means the world to me, and I'm grateful to have you along on this journey of healing and growth. Until next time, remember that you have the right to protect what's yours, and the strength to do so, even when others try to make you doubt yourself.